All right, I think we're ready to jump into this. Thanks all for attending. Uh, I'll be talking about the data science evolution and how data science can be integrated much better, integrated into the health system to make the system much more proactive and better. Before I jump into it, just a little disclaimer that we'll be a lot of these models are still under development and being finalized. And so please consider this a presentation of my research. Again, there's no implied recommendations being given by the patterns that I'm showing in the data. So basically in our system today, we're gathering more data than ever. All kinds of MRIs, blood tests, wearables, all this information coming in. And we're at a point where we're ready to start using this quite a bit better. And that's really what I'm going to be focusing on, is showing how we're not using it and could be to in various aspects of health and wellness. Currently, you got these different tests available, and they're sort of siloed. You can get blood tests, and you get interpretation on that. You can get genetics tests again, and the problem with that, it is insightful, but there's nothing you can do about your genetics. And you're getting information from your wearables and recommendations based on that. But with good data science, you could connect all that information into scores, biological ages, and begin much better insights about the combination. And that's one of the areas where we're really lacking, and where good data science can start integrating this information. A little bit about my background is I spent the last 16 years in the financial industry. What I noticed at the beginning, what we're finding in the data differed with what was very conventional. There was conventional practice being pushed on me. I was being told there's certain kinds of trends we're supposed to follow in the market, and certain kinds of stop losses we were supposed to implement, and the data kept disagreeing with that. And so really we just made the decision to bet on the data. And weren't very popular in the beginning. We were only able to raise $50,000 under management. But over time, as people saw that this really worked well, that following the data was better than following convention in many cases, we grew very fast and got to a point several years ago where we hit capacity. And basically now, when we exceed this capacity, we actually force investors to redeem their money, which is a much better problem to have than fundraising, having trouble fundraising. But we're very limited. That $9 billion under management represents less than 0.1% of the wealth, and so and that's our capacity of who we can help financially. But we thought maybe if we could find patterns in health, there would be no limit to the capacity that we could offer this to everybody and integrate into the health system. And so I'm going to show you many examples in this presentation where the data disagrees with conventional practice or just simply isn't being used. When you can quantify, there's sort of the question, what can that do for you? When you can sort of quantify your health with something data-driven, it gives you the tools necessary to go from reactive to proactive. I know we've been talking for decades about becoming proactive, and it's becoming cliche that we want to do that, but why hasn't that really happened in widespread practice? And it's because the tools aren't there. And the tools, we believe, can be created by data-driven APIs, and that can be integrated into the system. And so when you have that, you can track your health in real time. You can understand how changes in your lifestyle or any kind of changes you make affect your health, because you need that metric. Like right now, we have no real metric of health that's very believable. We're getting all kinds of. There are a bunch of health scores out there, but they're based on heuristics. They're based on opinions. They all disagree with each other. How about one based on actual data, based on actual outcomes? And so we've been gathering databases of millions of people from various studies, followed for up to 15 years to come up with a system where it's purely data driven. and the result is something kind of like the FICO score. We've been using that for 30, 40 years. It's a measure of our financial health, basically. And it's a measure of future risk, and people understand it and have adopted it. So creating something like that in health makes sense that it could actually be adopted. And so just going back to sort of my personal story and some of the first patterns we dug into is I had hit 40, and that's sort of when I decided, okay, my doctor's telling me my cholesterol is too high, my lifestyle wasn't great. I was doing the standard American diet, maybe exercising 1 or 2 times a week, all kinds of sugary drinks, and so I started exercising more, and I felt like I was getting a little healthier, and then I started eating better and cutting out the sugary drinks, and then I started exercising even more, to where it was every day, and I got to where I was feeling much fitter and healthier. But over 15 years, this is where my LDL cholesterol went, and it never went down. And that's sort of when I realized something might be wrong in the system, and was this really data driven? And so that was one of the first patterns we looked at. And I also started doing all these other tests. And the problem is the problem with all these tests out there is lack of attribution. They give you a result and no real explanation. No explanation. Like you get a age on pretty much everything, but there's no real interpretation or data-driven aspect of it. Interpretability, you get big lists of biomarkers, hundreds of biomarkers, but what does it actually mean? How can you believe the recommendations on what range to be in? And not holistic. They're often looking at one predictor, one blood biomarker and one outcome, in this case, cholesterol. You're looking at one, and again, it's only looking in the context of cardiac events. So we said, how can we do this better? How can we overcome these weaknesses with a data-driven approach? And I'll get back to that, but I first wanted to show some of the patterns on cholesterol, and I figure I'd get a show of hands on each of these levels. This is the bad cholesterol, LDL, and let's see how many. And we're gonna do a poll of which level has the lowest association with 15-year all-cause mortality for people 60 to 70 years old. And first of all, anyone want to predict in the recommended range, less than 100? So I kind of probably spoiled a little bit, but okay, how about 100 to 140, being a little bit above the range? All right. How about 140 to 200? All right, and 200 plus, the people with the highest LDL cholesterol. Anyone predict that? So the answer is above average, have the lowest mortality rate. So let's dig into this a little bit more. Again, this is based on thousands of people followed for 15 years, 60 to 70. And we said, okay, what is their association? The people in the recommended range, under 100, what's their association with a major cardiac event? And sure enough, there's a 20% reduction in cardiac event. And again, only 5% of people are naturally in that range without cholesterol meds. So it's not natural to actually be in the range, which is why the average is closer to 140 or 150. So that's sort of why everybody comes out of the doctor's office saying my cholesterol is too high. But then what about all the other outcomes? There's a lot of other things that can happen to you other than a cardiac event. Again, type 2 diabetes, COPD, liver disease, kidney disease, dementia, and all-cause mortality. I would think, so we're looking at one outcome. I would think all-cause mortality is a pretty important outcome, don't you think? And so that's when I realized, okay, the 5%, there might be a reason we have that cholesterol in us. Again, not a biologist. I'm not here to I'll let others discuss the mechanisms. But that association's there, that the 5% with low cholesterol at least don't seem to be the healthiest. And then some of the researchers, they sort of see this, and because they're so set on cholesterol being bad, they say, well, cholesterol cholesterol is known to go down right before you die, or or when you have cancer. And we said, okay, we're weeding out all the people with pre-existing cancers, heart conditions. This is the mortality graph, 60 to 70-year-olds within the recommended range. They have about a 12%, almost 12% mortality rate over the next 10 years. I said, let's look at the people, the above average group. That's their mortality rate. So it definitely makes you scratch your head about the system. Again, none of this disagrees with the research. It's just so many of the papers are based on that lower left curve. It's looking at one predictor, one outcome. This is an example of how data science can help you take a holistic approach to looking at things. And again, this isn't any kind of recommendation or anything. It just empowers people to look at this and understand their state. If you have a 140, 150 LDL cholesterol, where you actually stand. And again, this is sort of back to the look that most research papers take. This is on the x-axis, you got LDL cholesterol. On the y-axis, you got a risk multiplier of a cardiac event. This is all normalized by age. And you can see, yes, the people, the small percentage who are around 180 or above are about 40% increased risk over the people with the very, very lowest. But we said this visualization is very narrow. Let's come up with a better visualization, the way someone can get a holistic picture. And we said, let's take the list of of various ranges of LDL cholesterol. Let's look at the data, and let's sort of come up with a color-coded representation of risk. And you can see for a cardiac event, you get the lowest prevalence of people with 100 or less, and about that tan color is about 50% increase in prevalence. But what about all the people in the middle? 80% of people are in the middle. And you can represent this, and you can see that really for people about with 150-ish cholesterol, it's only about a 10% increase in risk of cardiac events. So it's actually not that much. So this helps quantify it for people. And then next to that, you can say, okay, now let's look at metabolic health. Let's look at the association with type 2 diabetes, which ends up being flipped, and all the others. And actually, low cholesterol is one of the top predictors of dementia, of things on your blood work. So this sort of gives a full picture, and this is something we're going to be publishing in January, a version with all the numbers and risk multipliers in there, so that you get a good picture. And also important to have men and women. In this case, for LDL cholesterol, men and women follow similar patterns, but for other biomarkers, often the same recommended ranges exist for men and women, where there's much different relationships. So it's important to analyze men and women separately. So it's sort of back to my original frustration. I said, okay, like recently, in the last couple of years, we've had these health models. Now I can go plug in all my blood work and see, okay, now let's put this next to my complete health risk score based on predictive models, based on actual outcomes. And I could see that sure enough, there was something wrong with the system. That with accurate predictive models, I could confidently say my risk of cardiac event dropped 75%. And that would have been nice to know along the way. We said, okay, that's just one marker. Let's look at a guide. It turns out LDL cholesterol doesn't even make the top 10 of things on your blood work for what's predictive of a cardiac event. Yes, it is a weak predictor, but HDL, good cholesterol, we don't pay that much attention to. Very, very predictive, just about every disease. And a ratio that we sort of figured out is the most important ratio. LDL to ApoB, you actually want as high as possible. ApoB is a protein that binds to LDL, so it's very, very highly correlated. That's probably the one cholesterol ratio that's not currently shown on your blood test, and probably the most important one. And you can kind of apply data analysis to interventions. Again, these are all association studies. There could be all kinds of covariates, but how much PEEP is okay? And certainly You can see in our big databases that the and again, the y-axis, think of that as a representation of higher being less overall disease risk. We just sort of average all the disease risks to give a ballpark picture of health. And it did seem like the people who ate no beef had the best outcome, but 1 to 4 times a week, maybe a small hit in health, and the people eating meat every day, I would say that bar being half the size is somewhat equivalent to having twice the disease prevalence. Chicken, not as bad, but it seemed like the numbers were the healthiest. More salt added to food, you can see was associated with more disease prevalence. And the surprising one was cheese, because more cheese seemed to be correlated to being healthier. And it's sort of for that we sort of jokingly talk about inventing a diet called the Chegan diet. So we're going to have mostly whole foods, the plant-based, but add some cheese and maybe some red wine. Another thing, application we want to show, this was just another finding on smoking. Again, the y-axis here is a multiplier of risk of getting lung cancer. Think of like the imaginary line at 1.0 being someone who's never smoked. And so someone who's smoked for 40 years, a pack a day, is on that top line. They carry a risk of like 28, almost 30 times the risk of a average person of getting lung cancer. So no surprise there. But what was pretty interesting is that if that person quit, the longer they quit for, that they could actually reduce their risk. No matter which line they're on, they could reduce their risk by 75%. So we think of using data just as a motivator for someone who's still smoking, and they think, okay, I've already baked in this risk, and I'm going to get it. It's actually still a lot that could be done, and in this case, by quitting. So having these kind of data representations could be strong encouragement. In terms of what to measure, I'm going to talk a lot about what to measure, because we're not measuring all the right markers in our blood test. We currently use creatinine as a measure of kidney health, and it's a very weak marker. And what's shown here is the rate of kidney, or the prevalence of kidney disease based on different quantiles of creatinine. And you can see here the reason why it's used to diagnose chronic kidney disease is because the people with the highest do have a higher rate of kidney disease. But most practitioners know it's a pretty poor marker. You can also have high creatinine because you have high muscle mass. So there's a better marker to measure, and it's cystatin C. And so we talk a lot about adding this to your blood tests. A lot of doctors don't even know what this measures. Yeah, they probably just may measure it when someone's already like at near kidney failure, but it's actually the number one predictor of everything on your blood work of a cardiac event. So it's a measure of kidney health, and it predicts cardiac events better than any of the cholesterols. So it's something really everybody should be measuring. It's usually about a $20 add-on, but you got to know to ask your doctor to measure it. Liver health, again, another commonly missed biomarker. GGT is the best predictor of liver disease. So if you want to measure kidney health, make sure that I get that added to your test. And again, this is the same deciles. You can see people with the highest GGTs have 4 times the risk of liver disease. So it can be an early indication of something wrong. And again, these are graphs going out 15 years. So these are early predictors. These are things you can measure before you have symptoms of various diseases. Genetics, we want to show how we have the ability to include genetics in with the blood work. So on the y-axis is the relative rate of Alzheimer's, or I think we looked at overall dementia, so including Alzheimer's. And those lines represent the different genetic profiles. So as you probably know, that E4 is the sort of, I guess, commonly known as the Alzheimer's gene, and you either have you could either have no copies, 1 copy, or 2 copies of that gene. And the people with one copy have about 3-ish multiple on their risk for Alzheimer's. And the people with 2 copies have a much bigger multiplier. But on the x-axis, we have sort of blood work biomarkers and an indicator of your health, indicator of your brain health. Again, based on looking at all these millions of people over so many years. And you can see that if you had a very healthy lifestyle, you could basically be on the left side of this curve and have a smaller multiple or risk multiplier for dementia. And if you had a horrible lifestyle and you have the worst biomarkers, you're going to be on the right. So it's sort of, again, this goes to all these tests are showing, having separate genetics versus blood work and lifestyle. This shows that there is something you can do no matter what profile you run. So it doesn't disagree with the research. If you have 1 copy of the Alzheimer's gene or 2, your risk is higher, but you do have within your control to move over to the left side of this curve. And you could, and even with 2 copies of that gene, you could have only a 3 times normal multiplier of Alzheimer's versus 14 times multiplier. And you can also be very unhealthy. You could be lucky and not have any of the E4 genes, and you could be at the right side with an unhealthy lifestyle and be increasing your risk. So again, we want to integrate into the system because we want people to be able to take control of their health. And there are certain elements you can't control, which is your genetics, but a lot you can control. And seeing that integration can be very useful to people. Systolic blood pressure, again, top marker, and you can often log it on your wearables, and it can be connected in with these scores. So again, it's number 1 or 2 predictor of cardiac event amongst people who have never had a prior cardiac event. So again, a very healthy asymptomatic population. It's a very, very top predictor, not just if you're over a certain limit, but trying to get that blood pressure, say like being a 110 versus 120. You can differentiate risk there. Hand grip strength. At our booth, we take hand grip strength because it's a top predictor. It's actually top predictor than any blood biomarker for dementia. So there's a lot of mechanistic reasons. Muscle mass in general is preventative of dementia. So when you look at sort of that, if you think back to that graph with the E4 or 2 E4s, a lot of that prediction is in grip strength, and it predicts a lot of different diseases. So basically, the Volarich health process is to take all this information and provide it in a simple app. And we've got the app coming out in a couple months. It's going to have full age, full score all filled in. At our booth, you can sort of get a preliminary look with our preliminary models. But we combine that all into, we want to basically make this easy for people. So you got all this data research, goes into a set of scores, and that can eventually be implemented in interventions. And we want to integrate this, again, we don't want to be the implementer of all interventions. There's 1,000 companies out there doing this. We actually want to make our tool able to be embedded in all these other tools so that they can actually monitor someone's progress better. So really the differentiators between good data science and models out there are these points. Again, you've got a lot of scores out there, but most of them are not based on data, based on outcomes. They may say they're data-driven because there's data flowing in them, but they're not actually learned patterns based on actual outcomes. It's very important for these models to be explainable. You've got a lot of black boxes out there. With our system, you would see exactly, if you got a bad score, you'd know what the contributors are. If you've got a good score, you'd see what you're doing well. And it's got to be flexible. Not everybody has all the information or all the blood work or all the genetics. So these are very The models have to be made very flexibly to handle missing information. And they're also adaptable to more new cutting-edge technologies, such as genetics, proteomics, epigenetics, things that are not widespread in use today. And we put a lot of emphasis on data quality for sure, because it's very easy for bad data to flow into a model, and you end up with poor accuracy or something that could be misleading. So basically, the idea is you take all this information, where we've got an API under development that we want to make available to all kinds of businesses out there, so that really this data-driven approach could become widespread. So what would we accomplish if the healthcare system actually uses data in this way? First of all, people would be making data-driven decisions about their health. They'd be seeing what are the actual markers tied to actual outcomes that they need to work on. You can personalize way more easier. We have got studies that work on populations and might say this diet's better generally than this diet, but maybe for that individual, their health scores or risks go the wrong way, so they know that that's not for them. So personalization becomes much more doable and accurate with a data-driven system. And there'd be a lot more transparency to the patient. Instead of sort of being told 3 or 4 different things by 3 different doctors, they would actually be able to understand why they're being told what they're told, and have that empowerment. And the final point, that there are much better biomarkers than LDL to be looking at. So this is what our current report looks like in the doctor's office. Got a big list of stuff. There's nothing data-driven about that. And not only is it not data-driven, but the patient doesn't know what most of those things mean, and the doctor doesn't know what most of those things mean. There are predictors on there that are in fine print that even the doctors don't know are top predictors of different diseases. And what that becomes is a set of, a report with imagine a report with a set of scores and biological ages, where you can actually spot, and you can figure out in 30 seconds where you need the most work, or where that patient needs the most work, and can have that discussion over the 5 or 6 minutes they have with that patient, and the patient walks away with that information on their app and follow-up and interventions. So really, we're trying to be a facilitator of proactive care. We have that representation in a score of someone's future health risk, and so we have that measurement of health. We provide education to the customers. Transparency helps build trust. Allow longitudinal tracking. Again, these are all create the experience better for all kinds of apps and doctors' offices that may want to use a system like this. Allows personalization and saves a lot of time. Basically, again, 30 seconds to interpret the output of a data-driven report. I talked a little bit about advanced testing. Like right now, we do everything with blood work that's been around for decades and a little bit antiquated. We have a blood draw with a phlebotomist. It's pretty invasive. Once we sort of, I think, articulate the value of being able to measure things correctly and its predictiveness of future or sort of representation of health, that will enable much more advanced methods to become more widespread. So including genetics. Again, genetics we currently are very close to having built into our models. Proteomics, we have a booth at our booth with Molecular U, who we're working with closely, developing the very advanced proteomics tests. Again, and we see that this advanced technology is so predictive that it'll likely replace the blood test and epigenetics, and getting to less and less invasive. So going from a blood draw to a blood prick, even a lot of information that we can get through wearables. So that's where we really see the future of testing going, as we start to adopt better measures that are more data driven and better metrics of future health. This was something we did a podcast on just recently. We wanted to show some of the flaw in analyzing or diagnosing someone with prediabetes based on just an A1C of 5.7. So if someone's diagnosed with prediabetes, you kind of assume that they're high risk for diabetes. That's sort of the meaning. And what we did is we said, let's look at our scores, people with the lowest scores and the highest scores based on all the predictors. And again, these are people, I think 16,000 people we found in the UK Biobank, all with the same A1C of 5.7, right on the border of prediabetes. And we saw the people with the lowest health scores, based on combining all the biomarkers, had 15 times more risk of developing diabetes than people with the healthiest scores. So there are some very healthy people walking around here with A1Cs of 5.7. Again, it's still the number one predictor. If I looked at just one marker, it's still the number one predictor of diabetes. BMI is second. I think HDL is third. It goes down the list. But if you integrate that all into a combined model, you see how much better that can represent someone's health versus looking at a single marker. You can also project someone out 15 years. In this case, again, we took a profile. Again, this not a specific person because we couldn't use exact people, but there are a lot of people with a certain profile in our database. They're smokers, overweight, and pre-diabetic, and we sort of see, and we took ones that were about mid-50s. So you could be 55 years old. The average risk could be of a cardiac event is that bottom line, and this particular profile has a multiple of that risk. They're that top red line, and we said what can that person influence with lifestyle change? We said, okay, if they quit smoking, first of all, they lose weight and lower their blood sugar through better eating habits, even at age 55, we could actually show how someone can change their trajectory of health to be better than average risk by the time they're 70. So again, this is how this can relate to someone who's younger and interested in health and living longer. Okay, you may not have the risk today, but being able to see that trajectory can be very, very helpful and useful for people who are very health conscious. And basically, our vision is how we can help all kinds of businesses with our scores. These are the areas we came up with where having a data-driven system could facilitate their work. Everything from the practitioner, the researcher can have a much better biomarker as their endpoint, and actually reduces the need. Reduces your need for a large sample size. You could need maybe half as many people in your studies. Saves costs, has a more robust solution. You can talk about not just did they lose weight. You can talk about how they lower the risk of 7 different disease areas, all in one study. Health coaches, again, to be able to articulate, be able to monitor progress. Both clinical and health platform developers. There's a lot of health scores out there. Having a data-driven score is much better. And again, this could even extend to self-insured employers who just want healthier people in their workforce with better employee satisfaction. And this can be useful to create better drugs as well, because if you analyze all those endpoints, you can actually know in advance, is a phase 2 drug going to work in phase 3? You can know the side effects in advance, or get a clue of the side effects if certain scores get worse. So it can be accurate really across all these industries. And so where we're at today, we actually do have a working API. We're testing, developing out further to start integrating in the health system. And I wanted to at least give one takeaway. If there's with all this sort of data findings, what can you walk away with today? It's basically add these 5 things to your blood test. These are the things commonly, again, our models use 50 plus of the most predictive biomarkers, but these are the 5 that are often left out of the test. So that could be the one walk away from today's talk that is very utilizable. There's not a lot of interpretation out there on some of these, but it will be there, and you're going to want to have that in your blood work when our tools come out, so you can get a better depiction of your health in various areas. And we've got a booth where you can get your in-body tested and your grip strength tested, and some of these biomarkers that we're talking about and emphasizing, and have a full user experience. I'm pretty sure that's, other than the QR code, that's the last slide. So while she's pulling that up, I'm happy to take questions. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. That was great. In my wisdom years and studying surveillance capitalism, I'm always nervous about personal agency and privacy of the data. And so I think the aggregate data is important to drive what you're doing, which is excellent. What can you say to consumers to understand how your data is being used, and can you opt out if you didn't want it to go to, let's say, Big Pharma for research?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So that, and that goes to sort of to the second product we're creating. The first is an API where we're not storing any of your data, but what we're working on, and will take longer and have to deal with all that, is a full platform where we store people's data, and we plan to highly respect people's privacy, people knowing where their data is at. Again, if we're servicing a lot of different, let's say, different apps and doctors' offices, you'll be able to see on the platform who has your data, because basically you've probably given permission to 5 different vendors, but probably forgot who you did it. So you'd be able to monitor that, cut off access, and also delete your data completely. So this is a very important topic, and one of the reasons this product takes longer is because we want to make sure that all the security and compliance is in place for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. So if someone in this room wants to go to their doctor and they say, Doc, I need a test on size statin C. The doctor says, A, I don't know what you're talking about. D, we don't offer that. What are they supposed to do?
Yeah, it's a good question. A lot of doctors won't allow that. So we will have our app ready in January, where it should be released. You can get on the wait list now, and you can actually get your blood test through our app. There's also other providers as well. You can always see another doctor too. Yeah.
Does this only work for people of certain age?
Good question. The question is, does it only work for people of a certain age? We're trying to decide at what point or what age you're considered aging. I would say it'll probably be 25 and above. It's again, there are some metrics that are more relevant for people of younger ages. How we present that data is different for younger people versus older people, because it's more of a future risk. It's more of a future trajectory, because the risk of most of these diseases before age 40 is very, very small, with maybe the exception of diabetes. It's a good question. No. Yeah.
How far have you taken the information in terms of biomarkers indicating things versus treatments that are going to change outcomes? For instance, the one that occurred to me, you mentioned the impact of grip strength as a predictor of certain things. So if I increase my grip strength, do you have any indications in your data as yet about how much that's going to change the outcome?
Yeah, that's a good question. So how the intervention side, so the first stage of what we're producing is purely assessment, so you can try things, but we're already starting to integrate our methods into various studies. So we for example, we work with a group that did a study on vegan, like vegan versus standard American diet, and we were able to see, okay, like their outcome was they lost weight, but that's just one biomarker, but that they actually get healthier. We implemented our study framework where we said, okay, their risk of type 2 diabetes actually stayed the same. They were actually pre-diabetic. And the reason why is because the weight, again, it was on women, mostly women, and the triglyceride, even though the weight went down, the triglycerides went up and the HDL went down. And those end up canceling themselves out in the overall health score. Now, it turned out some of the other disease risks improved. So it turned out to be a positive intervention. But having that study framework, if you had it, let's say you not only did it for vegan, we did it for keto, for Mediterranean diet, or just staying away from sugary stuff, right? And you had all those lined up, you could actually say, okay, this one's better for my high risk. I'm high risk for cardiac events, so maybe for me, the keto improves that the most. Or I'm at highest risk, I'm overweight, I'm high risk for type 2 diabetes, so maybe the Mediterranean diet is right. So that's basically in progress to create that. But it's sort of an application after having these scores and assessment. Now you can really go and cut through all this confusion of what intervention is best. I mean, you got all this high protein versus low protein debate going on, or cardio versus HIIT versus strength training. Like, what's better? What's the right combination? It's all that confusion that we hope to end with this kind of assessment. Thanks for asking.
Speaking about the importance of epigenetics and the expression of our genes due to lifestyle and environment, especially looking at these large data sets, what were your biggest aha moments, especially the importance ratio due to certain kind of environmental factors or of lifestyle factors, and when it comes to overall health, longevity?
Yeah, so with epigenetics specifically, there aren't enough data sets generated to understand the connection with interventions and even with outcomes. We actually have access to probably the best data set in the world on epigenetics, and so we can actually predict your age without knowing your age within 1.5 years. But the reason why that's still years away from being useful is because just predicting your age is not necessarily predicting your risk of disease. So again, age is a number you can predict, but it's not a very impactful model. So we don't think the epigenetics tests are really, again, if you've taken them, you'll probably see that from one to the other, you'll get a fluctuation of 10 or more years. There's also data stability issues on the technology side. We just published a study on the instability of epigenetics tests. So depending on they put 8 people sample. The slide that goes into the machine has like 8 spots. You can put your sample on, and depending on what, we found that if you happen to be on slide 1 or slide 8, you're going to get a value that's way off. So it's things like that, even in the hardware, that are issues that make us at least 5 years away from epigenetics being actionable. Thanks. Are we on time? Oh, I guess we're over time. We've got any last questions, or otherwise I won't keep you from much. Oh yeah. Well,
to follow up on the question just now, do you think that epigenetics, the role that plays is way lower than the role that lifestyle plays in terms of health and longevity?
Oh, the role of epigenetics versus lifestyle. I think you're going to be able to read the lifestyle in the epigenetics. So that I think of lifestyle as the way to interfere. Like once we have the right epigenetics test years from now that is figuring out all your risks, you're going to be able to see that change when you do a lifestyle intervention. Like you're going to be able to see your epigenetic risk change. And I think proteomics is going to be the next big one. I think that one is it's one where we have already linked to, link the current state of the science and state of the test to outcomes. That's so much more predictive. But I do think epigenetics is an interesting science that just the fact that we can predict age that well tells me it probably has potential to predict other things really well. All right. Well, I think that's all we got time for. So thank you all very much for attending.